Tonight's program is a collaboration between the Hickory Bookshop and the Gunn Memorial Library in Washington, Connecticut. Signed copies of tonight's book are available at the Hickory Stick and on their website. We are pleased to welcome Jan Philip Sendker, an international best-selling author, to discuss his latest novel, Heart Remembers, the final volume in the Art of Hearing Heartbeats trilogy. Just a couple of ground rules before we get started. Please remember to keep yourself muted throughout the program. There will be a Q&A session towards the end where you can unmute yourself and ask questions since we're such a small group tonight. This program is also being recorded, and you can find the recording tomorrow on our YouTube channel, and I'll put the link in the chat box. So without further ado, welcome and thank you.
Thank you for your kind words. Fran, will you say something or shall I just start?
I'm trying to unmute.
You made it.
You were successful.
Am I successful? Am I?
You're on. Yes, you're unmuted.
I'm unmuted. Okay. When I heard that Jan might be available to do an event with us, I was so excited because we have been, I mean, in terms of this trilogy, which began with Art of Hearing Heartbeats, we have sold many copies of it. And first we heard that the Heart Remembers was going to wrap it up, and anyone who has read the trilogy or read the first two books has been waiting for a very long time. How long has it been, Jan, since you?
7 years.
7 years. We were really thrilled that we were going to have the opportunity to do this. We're neophytes as far as Zoom events are concerned, so it was wonderful to be able to form the collaboration with the Gunn Memorial Library. And I'm sure you're all here because you're looking forward to this as much as I am.
Yeah, thank you, Fran. I was excited as well, and of course I would love to be there with you. This is only the second best. I really miss my readings, my interaction with you, my readers. It hasn't been possible here in Germany. I haven't done anything for the last 15 months. And so when the book came out, I thought there might be a chance to do some readings, but it's not possible yet, hopefully with my next novel. But this, I think, is at least better than nothing. So I very much appreciate all of you coming together here so that I can see you, you can see me. I'm sitting here at midnight, 30 minutes after midnight in Potsdam in my office at home. My family is asleep. And I have been looking forward to this for a long time, because as you said, it took me 7 years to finish this novel. I will talk about it a little later. Now it finally has come out, and I'm all excited because I know there are some people who have been waiting for it. And I certainly hope you will be moved by it, you will be entertained and touched by it like you were with the first two books of this trilogy. Let me talk a little bit about Burma or Myanmar, how it's being called, why I set a whole set of books there. Let me talk a little bit about how it has changed and my experience, my being there, and then a little bit about the new book, what's happening, but I won't give away too much. And then I'm happy to take some of your questions. Yes, why would a German author write a novel set in Burma or Myanmar? There are very few books set in that exotic Southeast Asian country. And it's easy to explain and it is difficult to explain. The first time I came to Burma was in 1995, so 26 years ago. In a previous professional life, I used to be a journalist. I was covering America, the United States for a German weekly. I was based in New York. And then I got transferred to Hong Kong. I became the Asia bureau chief based in Hong Kong, and I was very busy. China was opening up after Tiananmen Square. In Japan, there was a big earthquake, there was a gas attack in the subway, there was some unrest in Indonesia. So I was traveling constantly and was extremely busy. But there was kind of a voice in my head that told me, go to Burma. And I can't tell you where it came from. My Burmese friends are convinced that I must have been a Burmese in a previous life, and I just felt drawn back to my home country. I don't know. I'm not quite sure about that, but I can't explain why I wanted to go to Burma, because in those years, nobody went to Burma. And to be quite honest, if you had told me, please point out this country on the world map, I'm not quite sure if I would have found it. Maybe I would have mixed it up with Bangladesh or Thailand or something. So for whatever reason, I wanted to go. But in those years, Burma was still under military rule, and it had been closed for decades. The military took power in 1962. They basically closed the country. You couldn't get a visa, or only a visa for 7 days. It was a little bit like North Korea with better weather. And then in the early 90s, it opened up a bit and you could get a visa for 4 weeks, but still nobody wanted to go. There was no infrastructure for tourism. No politicians went, no NGOs, no tourists, no business people, nothing. But I did. I could convince Stern to send me there to do a story. And I remember how I came from Bangkok. It's just an hour flight from Bangkok, the capital of Thailand, to Yangon, which was the capital of Burma in those years. And I remember that it was late afternoon, early evening, so it was kind of dark, not completely dark, but we overflew the city, and it's a big city, Yangon. It's like 7 million people live there. And it was like flying over your beautiful little town at night. There were basically no lights. But this is a big city, Yangon, and there were no lights. And I was so completely puzzled. We touched down, the plane was empty. There were maybe 20 passengers on that Boeing 737 Thai Air. And we all were a little stunned. We, got the immigration done. It took a little while, and then we stood in front of the terminal, which was quite honestly not much larger than your beautiful bookstore, friend. A tiny little terminal. And I got into an old car, completely run down, old Toyota, I remember. And then we drove into town very slowly. And remember, I had just been to Bangkok and Hong Kong. So lively big towns with lots of traffic and neon signs and shops and shopping malls and so on. And in Yangon, there were no cars. There was no traffic. People were walking on the streets. Men were wearing long jeans and they were all walking hand in hand. There were lots of monks on the streets, but no neon signs, no shops, nothing. And I realized I had traveled for 1 hour, but I had traveled back in time, maybe 40, 50, 80 years. And that's a privilege. I know that now, because nowadays, I think with the internet and so on, it's impossible unless you travel maybe to a small tribe in Africa and the Amazon. You can't fly 1 hour and be back 80 years in time. At least not if you go to a big country, and Burma is big. It's larger than Texas. It's bigger than Germany and France combined. There are like 55 million people living there. But I was traveling back in time, and we rode into town, and I was so puzzled that at one point I asked my driver if there was a McDonald's in town. I wanted to know if there was any sign of Western, business culture. And the guy kept driving and said, "McDonald's, you said? Is the guy maybe Scottish?" And at that point, I realized he had never heard of a fast food chain called McDonald's. And even now, there's no McDonald's in Yangon. There's one Burger King at the new airport. but some things haven't changed. So I realized they had no clue, and soon I realized I had no clue either. I remember I was walking in the evening and the streets were still full. I had dropped off my stuff at the hotel. And it was such a lively scene. There were still some markets going on, and tea house was full, and people were on the streets. It was very hot. And then it made some strange sound I heard, and then it got dark, pitch dark. It was a blackout. That still happens in Burma, and it happened a lot in those years. And first I got scared, but then people were used to it. They just lit candles, and they put these candles on the tables in tea houses and door frames and window frames on the sidewalk, in the backyard. And after a little while, the whole neighborhood, and I had the feeling the whole city, was lit just by candles. It was such a romantic sight. And there were no noises by cars, there was no traffic. Only thing I heard were human voices, people laughing, people chatting, people talking, and people singing. And I followed these voices, these singing, and I ended up in courtyards, in a tea house, in a park, on the bank of a river, and it was always the same sound and sight. A young man was sitting in front of a young woman. Sometimes the man was playing a guitar, and he was singing songs. And later on, I learned that that was a very Burmese tradition. A young couple falls in love, and there was not much to do, so they got together, and the man was singing love songs to his girl. And I found that incredibly romantic. I was just very happy that it is not a German tradition, because I would still be single. I cannot sing at all. Even my kids can't bear my lullabies. And they say, oh, can mom sing tonight? Terrible. But I found that very romantic and very old-fashioned, of course, in Burma. And I spent 3 weeks there, and I realized that it was not just all very romantic. The country was and is extremely poor. The average life expectancy is around 50 something. It was ruled by the military, and it was a very corrupt, incompetent, and brutal dictatorship. So people lived in fear, and still they carried this burden with such dignity. They were so friendly, so hospitable, with such warmth, that I was really deeply moved by the way they dealt with all these things. And I spent 3 weeks there, and I came back at that time as a foreign correspondent. I had been to many, many different countries, 60 or 70 different countries, but I had never been to a place like Burma. And I remember just by chance, I ended up in Kalor, which is the setting for all my 3 novels. And I fell in love with that place. It's like a 35,000 people town in the hills in Shan State. And it used to be a British hill station. So there were still lots of signs from the British. There was even an old British club. When I came there, there was an old British hotel. There were lots of kind of Tudor style villas. And at the same time, there were lots of people from the surrounding mountains, lots of ethnic minorities. The climate is fantastic. And I met wonderful friends I'm still friends with. And one of these guys who was a little older than I am, he speaks all the languages of the ethnic minorities, the Paos, the Palongs. And he asked me if I had time to hike with him to a village. He wanted to show me a different side of Burma. And I was free, I was flexible, and I said, yeah, let's go on a hike. I didn't know what to expect. And in the evening, we arrived at a village. And as I said, my friend was very well respected. He speaks the language of the Pao, and the village head greeted us and invited us to his house, and we could stay there. And we spent a wonderful evening. They slaughtered a chicken for me, and they shared their curries. And so I could ask them questions, and they asked me questions. I went to bed, and next morning it was time to move on. We wanted to hike to another village, and I learned another Burmese tradition, that when you visit as a friend and you leave, they just don't say bye-bye or have safe trip. No, everybody comes together to see you off, and you get a farewell gift. These people are very, very poor. They don't have much. They grow tea, so basically what they have is tea. So I got a bag of tea, but not this size, not this size. It was the size of a potato bag, like a 25-pound potato bag. So I had this huge bag of tea with me. There were, around 120 people standing in front of me, and they were all excited. And I was really touched. I said, "Oh, thank you. This is so kind of you. And I love tea, but this is enough tea for the rest of my life. It's much too much. I just need a small bag." "Oh," said the village head, "don't worry. This is not just for you. It's for the whole family." Ah, okay. But at that time, my wife was living in New York and I was living in Hong Kong. So I said, "Thank you very much, but I live by myself." And that was translated into the Pao language. And when everybody had understood that I lived by myself, they all looked at me. And I think never ever in my life have so many people looked at me with such a pity. He lives by himself, this poor guy. And then later on, they got very tense, and my friend explained to me why. Because in Burma, you do not live by yourself. Doesn't matter whether you're young or old, a widow or whoever. Of course, you live with your family. The only people who live by themselves are these mean-spirited people nobody wants to live with. So they looked at me and thought, this guy, he made a nice impression about what's wrong with him, that nobody wants to live with him. So I didn't know that at that time. I just realized they got kind of tense and I wanted to relax them. And I said, I live in Hong Kong and my wife, she lives in New York, but hey, I call her every night. Ah, the village head said. And then it was translated into Pao again and everybody smiled. So if I called my wife every night, everything was fine. But the village head got a little suspicious and said, really every night? And I confirmed. I said, yes, really. Wow. Then you must have a loud voice. And only then did I realize that he thought, Hong Kong was a village on top of one mountain, and Hong Kong and New York was a village on top of another mountain. And every night I stepped on the edge of my village and yelled to my wife, Anna! So I realized it's different. And I left and I came back, I think a few months later, because I'd fallen in love with the people. And I visited Kalor and my friend said, hey, do you have time to go to this village again? They still talk about you. I said, yeah, sure. I had brought gifts for the kids, balloons and crayons and stuff. So we hiked again and it was a big welcome. Everybody was excited to see me again. And we had dinner at the village head's place, which actually was a big house. And then more and more people came. And we all had to sit in front of a cabinet. And I realized something really special is going on here. I thought maybe they had prepared a handcrafted Buddha for me or another special gift for the friend from abroad. So when everybody was there, we all had to be very quiet. And then the village head got up and he opened the cabinet. And inside wasn't a handcrafted Buddha for me. There was a TV set. In the meantime, the military had given away TV sets run on batteries because they wanted to spread the propaganda. But these people, they were not stupid. They didn't watch the propaganda, but once a week, they showed a foreign movie. And it was my lucky night. They showed a foreign movie on state TV. And it was just for 45 minutes. It was all in English, no subtitles, no translation whatsoever. And it was just a very stupid, brutal detective story set in Los Angeles. There was not much happening except that people killed each other, stabbed each other, helicopters exploded, cars crashed into each other. So it was the whole time, and people looked at the screen, and then sometimes they looked at me because I looked suspiciously like these people who kept killing each other. And after 45 minutes, it was all over, very disturbed. The village head got up, closed the cabinet, turned around, looked at me and said, "Young Philip, if you like, you can stay with us. It seems to be very dangerous where you are from." Can you imagine how shaken I was and how moved, how touched, how, I mean, you can't help but fall in love with them. And I came back, as I said, almost every year, sometimes twice a year, 3 times a year. I did research for all 3 books. And I think Burma is much more than just an exotic background of a story which could take place anywhere. I think Burma, its culture, its values, Buddhism, everything is very deeply entwined with all 3 books, all 3 stories. And the wonderful thing is that they have been translated into Burmese now. I'm a best-selling author in Burma, which is not so difficult because when you sell 1,000 copies, you're already a best-selling author. And I think the first 200 I bought myself. But it's, you know, it kept selling. And now I think they've sold more than 10,000 each book. But I even went on reading tours. And that, of course, you will understand, makes me very, very happy. You know, I go around to places and do readings in front of Burmese people. Even in Kalor, I went there and there were people coming from Yangon, and that's a 10-hour bus ride just to be at my reading. And I signed books, of course, and there was a young man, he had all 3 Burmese books, and he spoke a little English, and he said, "Oh, he loves my book so much for 3 reasons. One reason, they make him cry. The second reason, they comfort him. And the third reason, he learns so much about his country through my books." And I thought that's really quite a compliment. And that has to do with all my trips and all the help I get from my friends translating the language, the culture. And I just go there, trying to go there with an open mind, not to judge, listen, watch, observe. And sometimes it's not easy, I have to admit, because even maybe I was a Burmese in a previous life, but now I'm not. And there are moments where I just don't understand, where things are really different and I have a hard time comprehending their way of thinking. And I will give you one example because that's an important part of all 3 books. You know, in all 3 books, Julia Wynn, this American lawyer, goes to Burma and she is exposed to, you know, different culture, different country. She's challenged by many things. And sometimes I feel the same way. And sometimes she doesn't understand how things work there. She gets angry, she gets impatient. Same with me. Sometimes I get angry and impatient in Burma. And I would like to give you one example. I did some research, was still in the 1990s, about porters. You have to know that Burma has lots of ethnic minorities. There are, I think, more than 135. Of course, the biggest, it's not a minority, it's the Burmese, the Bama. They're like 60 or 70% of the people. But there are lots of other people, Karen, Kachin, the Shan, Pao, Palong, and some of these people are millions of people, and they have their own territory, and some of them would like to be independent or have more autonomy, and the Burmese won't let them, the military. So since independence in 1948, there has always been fighting and struggling and kind of a civil war in certain areas of the country. And in the 70s and 80s, they used a lot of landmines. And the military didn't have enough landmine detectors or landmine sweepers. So they used people, human beings. And of course, nobody did that voluntarily. So they surrounded whole villages, kidnapped all the young men, and used them as porters and landmine sweepers. They sent them ahead and they walked through rice paddies and the jungle. They stepped on the mine exploded, the guy was dead. Not too many people survived that, of course, but I found 3. And they told me about the torture, about the terrible time in the jungle. And a big part of that is part of a well-tempered heart, because one of my characters, Tata, experienced all that. So his experience is based on my research and their stories. And these three young guys told me their stories, and I got really angry at the soldiers and the way they were mistreated, these three young men. And I said, you know, this is really, you must be so angry at the soldiers. And all three said, no, no, we deserve that. I said, what? How did you deserve that? Oh, we must have done something terrible in a previous life. That was our karma. We deserved that. And of course, that was a moment where I really hit a wall. I couldn't understand it. I got even angrier and said, you know, they mistreated you, they tortured you. They are perpetrators. They have to be brought to justice and put in jail. And they couldn't get why I got so angry. They were convinced they deserved it. So here we see a very different approach to life. And again, that I try to make that part of the books, because that's, for me, part of the beauty of traveling is challenging yourself, your ways of thinking, exposing yourself to a different culture, different experiences. And that did happen a lot to me, because Burma is different. But then something amazing happened. In 2010, the country very slowly opened up. And it was, for me, I went there every year, sometimes twice, between 2010 and 2020. And that's where my new book is set. That's between 2007 and 2019. And I have a hard time describing it, because it is like an awakening. There was a people living under fear, under the military rule. There was no freedom of expression. There was no freedom of the press. And all of a sudden, that changed. All of a sudden, within a few years, Burma had the freest press in all of Southeast Asia. The fear was gone. And it's amazing what that does to people. They assembled, they set up parties and NGOs. And they were the young. They were so thirsty. They were connected with the world through the internet. When I walked through Yangon, there were lots of signs for English classes, Japanese classes, IT classes, because they were so far behind. And now the country had opened up and they got connected via the internet. They had, nowadays, you know, when I first traveled to Burma, I think in all of Kalor, maybe there were 2 telephones, landlines. And now Burma has more SIM cards than citizens. More than 55 million SIM cards in that country. And they all have these smartphones, not all old used ones, but no, new Chinese-made smartphones. So they were connected. And the internet connection was very good. I could sit in Kalor in my tea house and watch a movie or a German soccer game. So good was the internet connection. So that was wonderful to see. And some taboo subjects could be talked about. And this all came to an end 3 months ago. As we know, the military took over again. And now they are putting the country back into the dark ages, I would say. But this is a very important time. It was a very important time for Burma, the last 13 years. And as I said, that's where my new novel, The Heart Remembers, is set. The main character is basically Kubobo, a 12-year-old who lives with his uncle, Uba. Some who have read the first 2 books, they know Uba very well. He is 80 now, so it's more like grandfather and grandchild. And Kubobo and Uba live together in Kalor. Kubobo's father comes once, twice a year, and then Uba disappears. His father visits him for a few weeks, and then he goes back to Yangon. And his mother, who also lives in Yangon, never comes. And Bobo doesn't know why. It's a family secret. And family secrets are called secrets because nobody wants to talk about it. And it doesn't matter whether you're in Burma, America, or Germany, nobody likes to talk about family secrets. So Kubobo accepts it. In Burma, people don't ask questions anyhow. And he is an obedient child, even though he is longing for his parents, but he keeps it to himself. he lives with Uba, and it's kind of, the whole book is like the first two books. It's about love. But this book might be the most complex one because it's about the different phases of love. It's not just between husband and wife. It's about a young child and his uncle. They are connected through a very strong bond. It's about husband and wife and their love. And it's also about the love between the child and his or her parents. So different phases, different layers of love, and I try to explore them. So Kobobo lives with Uba, and one night he wakes up and Uba is not next to him. Usually they share a bed. And he hears a strange sound. So he looks around the door and he sees Uba sitting in the living room in front of an old typewriter next to a candle, and Uba is typing something. Kobobo goes back to bed and wonders, is very curious. Next morning, Uba is sound asleep next to him, and Kobobo is very, very curious. He checks the whole hut, and finally he finds the typewriter and a manuscript. And he knows he is not supposed to read it. That's why Uba is typing at night. But of course, he is too curious, and he starts to read. And usually I don't read at my readings because I like you reading my books yourself instead of me reading it to you. But here I would like to read the first 10 lines because that's what Kobobo reads, and it changes everything. They demanded a courage of themselves beyond the strength of their hearts. By the time they realized their mistake, it was already too late. She had no plan but a dream. He had neither one nor the other. He was afraid. And of course, fear is the natural enemy of love. A person who loves has no fear. A person who fears cannot love, only cling. Both were prisoners in their own worlds who believed they could free one another if only they loved sufficiently. Love can accomplish many miracles, but it could not fulfill this hope, a hope as old as love itself. He reads this and he knows immediately what Uba is writing down is the story of his parents. And now he wants to know. He wants to know the family secret, why they don't live together, why they live in Yangon, and why he has to live with Uba. First, Uba is a little reluctant, but then he understands and he starts to tell Kobobo the story of his parents and their love. And it's, of course, you have figured it out by now, Julia is the mother of Kobobo and Tata is his father. And I don't want to give away much more because to find out how this love evolved and what happened to them, you will have to read the book. It is like in the second book, of course, a love between two people who come from very different cultures, a rich, successful lawyer from New York and a poor monk from Burma. And what I try to explore, what I try to describe, what I try to ask is their love strong enough to bridge this huge divide between these two people? And if they are capable of doing it, again, I can't tell you, you have to find out yourself. Yeah, so that was my little introduction to Burma and why I set my novels there. And if you have questions now about the first two books, the new book, my writing, please feel free to ask.
You guys can unmute yourself at this time if you have any questions.
Did you work with the translator of the English translation, and did you have any questions or problems with the translation?
Yeah, I worked with Kevin. He translated all 3 Burma novels, and a book I did with my son and an American author about Burmese fairy tales and folk tales. And I have known Kevin now for a long time, and we worked closely together. And I think he did a wonderful job. Sometimes he had some questions, but most of the time it was a very smooth cooperation. And I very, very much appreciate what he did.
Since the trilogy is over, where do you see yourself next?
Very good question, Joanne. You know, that's a big thing. I mean, first of all, it was a big thing to finish it because these characters, they had been part of my life for 21 years. The Art of Hearing Heartbeats came out in Germany in 2002, but I started researching and writing in 2000. So really 21 years, Julia, Uber have been part of my life. And first I was a little scared. Maybe I might fall into depression or I couldn't let go, whatever. But it was fine. When I finished this book, I had the feeling I could let go. It's fine. The journey was completed and I felt very comfortable with it. So, but then that was the question, what do I do now? And I had an idea for a novel set in Japan because as a correspondent, I had been to Japan many times. I'm fascinated by their culture, very different from ours or Burma or China. So I started doing research. It was last year in January. I started doing research. I read a lot of books. I developed the characters, and then I wanted to go to Japan one more time for about 3 weeks to do the final research. But then something strange happened. There was this strange virus coming up, and it was April, I think, and I had planned to go to Japan in May. And I thought, okay, if I can't go in May, then I go in June. It doesn't matter. Until I realized I wouldn't be able to go in June. I wouldn't even be able to go in September, October. So that plan fell flat and I did fall into depression. I was sitting in my garden. I thought, what am I going to do now? And then a story came up. I don't know, out of nowhere, I had a very vague story idea set in a fictional country in Southeast Asia. And I had the first sentence. And I went inside, I started writing the first sentence, and the second one came, a third one. So it was amazing. I wrote a whole novel within 5 months. Usually it takes a year or two, but this one just wanted out. Sometimes I wrote 5, 6, 7 pages a day. My whole family thought I was on drugs or something because I couldn't stop writing. And that book comes out in 2 months. I'm doing the audio version right now myself. It's coming out in Germany in 2 months. It's called The Rebel and the Thief. And I certainly hope that it will come out in America next year. It's being translated into English right now. And so we will see. But now the big question is, what am I going to do next? And maybe the Japan novel, I don't know yet.
Going back to Burma, what do you see? I mean, do you see hope in the near future for the people of Burma, or what is your take on it from what contact you have, or are you really able to have contact with your friends there?
Yes, I am, but it's getting more and more difficult. After the coup d'etat on 1st of February, for about 2 months, I spent every day 3-4 hours being in touch on Facebook and WhatsApp, posting things, organizing things here, going to rallies and demonstrations in Berlin, signing letters, open letters, and so on. I gave a lot of TV and radio interviews here in Germany because there are not so many people who have, knowledge about Burma. But I got more and more frustrated because the situation got darker and darker. Now about 1,000 people have been killed, more than 5,000 people are arrested. Some of my friends live underground now. A colleague of mine, a Burmese writer, got murdered last week in prison. It looks very bad. Nowadays, it's hard to get in touch because they cut off internet. It's really, sometimes they allow internet for an hour or so and then they shut it off again. So sometimes I get 6-7 messages within a few minutes and then I don't get messages for days. It's really difficult to be in touch. And whatever I hear is very grim. the situation is terrible. The food prices are up. The economy is down, completely down. People get arrested. People get killed every day. So it really looks like they take the country back into the dark ages again, a couple of decades. It's just horrible. And there's this young generation, they have known the difference, they know how it used to be. And they don't want to go back into the dark ages. They don't want to live like their parents or grandparents used to live. They want to be part of the world. They want to be connected with us, and they are not. It's all shut down, and we don't know what's going to happen. But I think the next few years are going to be very grim, very difficult time for Burma.
You heard there was a plane crash in Burma today. A senior monk was in the plane. I don't know many details. Senior monk was in the plane. It was a military, I believe. They were up in Mandalay province.
Wow. Wow.
And we're about to, the monk was on his way for the foundation of a new temple. The plane went down, everybody's killed. And that's the latest news. But I was wondering about the influence of Buddhism on sort of daily life in Burma, other than the belief in reincarnation and the daily going out and begging by the monks. How do you see, or how did you see Buddhism as a career or as a way of life, and its effect on Burmese society generally?
I think we cannot overestimate the effect Buddhism has in Burma. It's an interesting system. As a Burmese, usually as a man, but also as a woman, if you like, but certainly as a man, you become a monk at least once in your life, usually at the age of 12 or 13 or 14, but that's just for a week or so. But most Burmese I have met have gone back to the monastery, and you can become a monk for a day, for a week, for a year, for 2 years, for 5 years, and then you go back to your normal life. And at any given time, there are between 500 and 800,000 monks in the country. So a lot. And there's a constant exchange between the monks and the ordinary people, because as I said, only a few people are monks for the whole life. Usually it's for a time, and then maybe we would call it a retreat or something, and then they go back and they take the teachings back. So the religion is very much alive because of that. And if you ask me how does it show, I think certainly in this way that they are very patient, that they certainly believe there are many, many lives. And I think if you're absolutely convinced that this is just one little life out of so many, it makes you more relaxed, because there was a previous one and there will be a next one. And sometimes I got this, I couldn't understand why people were so patient and why people were so, yeah, okay, no, that's the way it is. Me coming from the West, we think, it's this life and we have to make the most out of it and so on. And there, people think differently. It's slower. And yeah, if it doesn't happen in this life, we try hard to be better, and next life might be better. So this is probably one thing which really strikes me every time, and which certainly comes from the Buddhist religion. At the same time, of course, I'm being asked, if this is a Buddhist country, how come they can be so brutal and so cruel to each other? Yeah, that's a good question. It's because they're humans. I mean, Buddhists are per se not better human beings than Christians or Muslims or Jews or whatever. And I think in all religions, people have committed the most horrific crimes in the name of Allah, Jesus, whoever. And unfortunately, the same happens in Buddhist countries. Buddhism is not a cure to become a better person forever or easily. There are wonderful people, as Buddhists, as they are wonderful people, as Christians or non-believers, whatever. So in the end, they're all human beings, and unfortunately, they commit terrible crimes, even though it has nothing to do with Buddhism.
So I just want to say thank you so much for being here. I apologize. I've never read your first two books.
Oh, that's wonderful. You have two great books to read.
Well, I love this book. I did love it. And I just wanted to ask how you got the idea of Bobo's Infliction.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one. I'm afraid I can't answer it. It popped up. It came. I knew that, I mean, we don't want to give away too much, but I knew that Julia was in a situation, I mean, she was completely overwhelmed and it was too much for her. And then there was a moment, and sometimes it happens. You do something you will regret for the rest of your life. You lost control of yourself. How this whole thing evolved, and that's the beauty of writing, I think, that you have to let go. It's not like I need this, I want that, how do I get there? The way I write is just, it's like a journey. I let it pour out. And sometimes it's a detour and it leads to something beautiful. Sometimes it's a dead end and I have to throw it away. But this kind of writing is mysterious. I see what's coming out, what's happening, and for whatever reason, this evolved. And for me, it made complete sense, even though it's pretty hard to read, I think, to digest. But it leads to the story, and it's part of the whole theme, I think. And the theme is important in all three books, and that is forgiving. I think in all three books, the forgiving part is very important. And I think it's important for every human being. I mean, for the health of our psyche, terrible things happen to all of us, sometimes on purpose, sometimes just by chance, sometimes for whatever reason. And I think we have to forgive, otherwise you can't carry on. And that is not something you do just snap and overnight. It's a process. Forgiving doesn't come free or easily, I think. It's a process, and I try to describe this in all three books, one way or the other, I think. But
well, it was a beautiful book. It was beautiful and it very insightful. Nice.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
What are you reading these days?
What am I reading? I just finished The Sympathizer by forgot his name, Vietnamian, that I like very much. The Sympathizer won the Pulitzer Prize a little while ago. I just bought this one here, Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. Big success, I think, in America, because I have a story in my mind. It's about a brother-sister sibling relationship. So I'm looking for some books dealing with this sibling relationship. I read a lot of good books, Japanese authors, but very little known in the West. And
Try me.
I have to go. I would have to go to my shelf. It's not Murakami. It's Kawakami. It's Kawabata, Mishina. So I really like Japanese literature, which is very different than our Western literature. But I like very much the way they tell stories. And do you like Japanese authors?
I'm currently translating a Japanese author to improve my ability to read and write. So yes, it's interesting. And what I'm finding most interesting is the current stuff that's being translated tends to be fantastic. I think that Murakami has had an enormous influence on other Japanese writers. And I'm not, to my taste, I'm not sure that it's a good idea, but there it is. So,
Yeah, interesting.
so I can talk about Japanese books the rest of the night. and when I was at Columbia, I talked to Donald Keene, who was the dean of Japanese translators. We talked about translation, and he said that one of the nice things about Japanese is that there's so much Japanese literature that you would never run out of translating. And he said that a friend of his learned Burmese, learned the main language of Burma, and he had translated and read all of Burmese literature. Now that goes back 40 some, more than that, many years ago. And there might have been more, although under a military regime, you wonder how much literature is getting written and out.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I noticed when the country opened up between 2010 and 2020. These 40 years, almost 50 years of isolation, they paid a heavy price. I mean, there was really 2 generations. For 10 years, they closed all universities because students demonstrated against the military. And what they did, they closed the universities. You had to do it from the distance, but without Zoom and the internet. And sometimes you studied philosophy, 2 weeks a year or something. So there's really an incredible lack of knowledge and trained people among a certain generation. And in terms of culture or intellectuals, writing, art, music, as I said, they were disconnected from the rest of the world. There was no influence. And you felt that when you went and talked to people. It was sad to see because they want to know, they want to be part of it, and they couldn't, and now they're cut off again. Yeah.
For what it's worth, I read the book, thoroughly enjoyed it, and I've reviewed it for a website called bookpleasures.com.
Oh, thank you.
So
thank you very much.
And my congratulations. I think it's. I thought there was a lot of really interesting stuff in it. One of the things was Bobo's ability to read people was an interesting ability, and then his initiative and his efforts. Well, I thought the structure of the book was interesting in terms of the point of view and the way that you handled the New York stuff and the early stuff in Burma, and then the contemporary stuff with Bobo.
Mm-hmm.
So
thank you very much, Wally. Much appreciated.
I wanted to take this opportunity to just say that Pat from Hickory Stick introduced me to your books in March, and I've read all 3 since then. Obviously, thoroughly enjoyed them and wanted to be part of this discussion. So I thank you for your time, and I thank you for all that you poured into your books. And as I listen to this conversation, I'm reflecting on the lessons of forgiveness, as you mentioned, and the different types of love, and the endurance of love through hardships. Particularly, I'm thinking Julia's father, and then Julia and Tartar themselves. And one comment that he made in your 3rd book, that he couldn't understand why he wouldn't do what he did for Julia, because there is no other way when you love someone. So I just thank you for the gift of these books.
Thank you, Karen. Much appreciated. Very much.
out of questions.
Okay, then it's time for me to go to bed. It's 1:30 at night. But I think this is good because this is easier to meet at this time for you instead of meeting at 1 o'clock during the day when people are busy, have to work and so on. So it was my pleasure to stay up. And now I look forward to cuddling with my wife, who is sound asleep, I suppose, hopefully, by this time.
And doing it this way, there's no jet lag.
That is true. That is true.
Thank you very much.
No, I really appreciate you coming here together. And maybe we will be able to meet in person next year when hopefully The Rebel and the Thief is coming out. And I will talk a little bit about that. And I will hear more questions and more of your stories. So please, all of you, stay healthy, stay in good shape and in good spirit, all things considered.
And you
Thank you.
also.
Thank you.
so much.
And
And
we look forward to welcoming you back to Hickory Stick when the opportunity presents itself.
Okay.
and don't
Thank
forget,
you.
Thanks to the library.
thank you so much. And don't forget there are signed copies at the Hickory Stick for everybody. So thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.